Hey, welcome back, fellow metalheads, to the GWN Metal Podcast. My name is Mike, and I'm your host. Today, I'm very, very excited to launch the start of a new mini-series entitled Metal Behind the Scenes. And now, before I get into what this is going to be about, let me ask you a few questions. Have you ever wondered what goes into having a local band grow beyond their city? How about how bands use social media to grow their audience? Maybe even how they book their tours? Or what about how they land interviews on podcasts like this or magazines? Well, in this mini-series, we'll be taking a peek behind the curtain to discuss the business sides of the music scene. This mini-series is inspired by many conversations that I've had with bands over the last couple of months here. And it's really created as an educational series where these set of interviews will be with industry leaders that will serve many of the bands who listen to the show, as well as satisfy some of the fans with the curiosity on these topics. Each episode will cover a key piece of the puzzle where we will not only share why certain strategies are used, but also leave you with actionable insights on how to apply them. Before I introduce our very first guest, I want to let you know that if you do find value in this type of conversation, and there will be many in this series, feel free to leave a like. And if you have some members who could benefit from this type of information, feel free to share this type of podcast with them. You can also follow us on our Instagram page, which is at @gwn.metal. We post there 6 times a week. You can also follow us on our Facebook, which is at greatwhitenorth.metal. And we have a couple of other pieces of content there. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our first guest of this series. He is the distinguished Montreal PR expert, John Asher. He has decades of experience working in PR and founded his agency in 2007 called Asher Media Relations, with the intent to help struggling artists gain the attention they need to support their musical careers. He has worked with indie and established artists, particularly in the extreme music scene, such as Annihilator and Fuck the Facts. He's worked with festivals like Armstrong Metal Fest and Loud as Hell. And he's even given lectures at McGill University and South by Southwest, just to name a few. Today, we cover a lot of ground, and so I will let you know that I would recommend you take some notes and maybe even re-listen to this a couple times. But just to give you a little bit of a teaser, some of the topics we'll be covering today are how to stand out in a global music market, 3 common mistakes bands make with PR and how to solve them, how good PR leads to funding, and the importance of building your band's quote-unquote resume and how that helps you with your branding long-term. So without further ado, here's the discussion on music PR for metal bands. So today, John, I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. I'm looking forward to hearing your insight into what is involved in public relations and PR, and really what you're seeing right now in terms of how artists can get prepared for not only the fall, but also specifically 2020 or 2022. When supposedly we're going to be seeing a return to form of shows and larger format things. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Awesome. So I wanted to just start off by giving you an intro here, or in your own words, of what you do through your company, Asher Media Relations, for those that are not familiar with you.
Yeah, it's a long, loaded question it could be, but in short, I'm just like I'm the PR guy. I'm the press guy. Your press rep, your agent to the press, media outlets. So basically, my job is to kind of figure out and brokering ways to get media publications to cover an artist and their upcoming album, single, or tour when that comes back. And we're just looking for press attention, right? And through the media outlets, the goal is to use the press outlets to reach, people who haven't heard of you or are familiar with you and are updated. And it's just using the media as a tool to reach listeners and readership and trying to create interest for the product, which is the band, right? It goes into more in depth. There's things that have to be prepared behind the scenes and pitches and relationships and what the band has going on, quality of music. There's so many factors, right, that go into play. But the end result is trying to get build up interest with by using the press for your product, which is the band and the music, right? That you're trying to sell and trying to get people to come to your live shows when that happens, and create a fan base through the press in a sense, right?
hmm Yeah, and one of the things that I think is important for people to note as we continue in our conversation is, like, when you're saying press, we're talking about a mixture of different things. And so there's definitely, the print side of things,
Yeah, I was gonna
magazines.
say the breakdown is you got print, and then you got online websites, but then that even breaks down to more because then it's like news coverage, online coverage of interviews or reviews. Then you got radio, which also breaks into online, satellite, FM,
Mm,
AM, right? And then you got the next breakdown of digital, Spotify, curated, Apple Music, all that stuff, right? It's just it's a various media formats too that have to be pitched, right?
definitely. Yeah. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you as well, which I think you've already started explaining, is that I find that a lot of people, when they start looking into the business side of things, they might conflate marketing and public relations together. And although they are definitely things that work in tandem and hand in hand to build that brand, for people that are looking for that clarification, what is the difference between marketing and public
I would
relations?
say in the music industry, they go hand in hand together. But when you're doing marketing, when a band's like, "Oh, we're going to take this," see what bands need to understand is your album's a product, and sometimes they forget it. So marketing, we're taking it to the market. We're taking it. It's like you're going to the mall, man. This is your store, and you're trying to get customers, right? So with marketing, I think the only difference between PR is PR, we're trying to use press and the credibility of interviews and reviews, right? And news coverage and stuff. Whereas I see when the marketing aspect is you're buying your placements. So when it comes to like a print mag, you're buying your advertisements. So you got your guaranteed placement of eyes on you, right? Same thing with online banner ads that you do on the websites and through the networks and stuff like that. When a band buys Facebook ads, that's guaranteed marketing. You're getting in front of faces, Uh, so that's how I see it. The marketing is you're paying for the guaranteed eyes, right?
Mm,
Doesn't necessarily, and you're trying to use it to be converted into, you know, a buyer, a customer, a client, long term, short term, whatever. So that's how I see it. And you're doing the same thing with press, but you're kind of avoiding spending all that money because advertising budgets versus PR are way more, right? Like labels, they spend a lot of money on advertising because they want those guaranteed eyes, right?
hmm
That's what you want. Even when you do your YouTube, a lot of bands I think sometimes forget, like when they see a YouTube video come up or something on their social media they're sponsored, so it's marketing dollars, right? That's that they're just pushing the guaranteed marketing dollars. Whereas PR, it's still a chance, right? I never tell a band you're guaranteed to be covering this and this. There's no guarantees with press because it's such a saturated market, which is the same for marketing. But the difference is when you're doing advertising, you're getting those eyes for sure. But with PR, it's like it's a gamble, but a good gamble, right? But the editors and the radio guys and the writers, they're so swamped. So like when you do get press, you should be super appreciative no matter how big or small, because that media rep took the time to show interest in your product and your band and to expose it to their readership, right? Or their listenership. So
Exactly. Yeah. So you're multiplying your reach through an already existed, like a fan base or a group of people that already subscribe to these larger publications. So
yeah.
it's just a little bit of a different angle to it.
Yeah. So the
Yeah.
same like you have your radio show, right? And your podcast. So it's like we're trying to use you to get to your listenership, right? So
hmm
that's usually it's a simple equation but a complicated one at the same time because there's bombardments, right? There's so many bands out there and record labels, and then there's statures that go with it, indie versus major, right?
Mm.
So yeah, it's a complicated game.
Yep, exactly. And one of the things that we're going to get into in a bit are some of the basics, some of the nuts and bolts when it comes to PR. And what I'm hoping here again is that bands that are listening, or even just fans that are interested in this topic, to understand what is involved with releasing albums and growing a brand that is indeed a band. One of the things that we need to get our things straight is what is kind of the right mindset to get into this type of more business conversation. And so I wrote down 3 things that I've been thinking about, and John, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on them. So the first one is definitely having a positive outlook on shows returning. So right now we're more than a year, at least in Canada, where there haven't been any major shows available. And one of the things that I was thinking about is when it comes to PR, is your band going to be ready to be top of mind for promoters or top of mind for people in the media once things kind of kick off a little bit more? And so, John, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Like, how important is it for bands to have that positive mindset?
I think they should all have the positive mindset of getting back to the stage. I think a lot of them are, right? What I think is going to happen is it depends on your local scene, but promoters are going to really pick and choose the sure thing right now. That's how I look at it partially. Um, so the big shows that are guaranteed going to make money, the promoters are definitely going to hop on and promote. And then for the local indie scene, hopefully the local indie promoters will come back and the venues are still there because people are itching for. I think it's not going to matter whether it's bigger or small, but people want to get out. They want to socialize. They want to hear
hmm
live music. So I think what I'm predicting is there'll be like a big increase at the beginning, and then it'll slow down because I don't think a lot of people have money to go out still, right?
Mm.
There's people in various different economics. Some are okay, some are not, right? So, but I think there will be eager fans to get out and just go to the bar, whether it's a big venue or small venue, and listen to live music along with socializing with members of the scene. I know personally, I can't wait to get to some of the first shows, and I haven't seen some people from the scene in a year now.
hmm
That we were just these are people from the scene, and we all would just always hang out at the shows together. That was the thing. So I'm looking forward to that when that happens. Hopefully, we'll see when it happens, but I think there'll be an increase, and then it'll pause for a bit. I think again because I don't think economically everybody can go to everything,
hmm
but people will pick and choose what they can go to, and I think each scene will have its supporters to come out and financially boost it and just support it.
For sure. And you hit on something exactly that was my next point, which is that, you know, not only bands are craving to get on the stage, but, all of the fans out there are craving, that authenticity, that connection with the artists and new music as well to kind of hold them through this time. And so one of the things that bands should also be very mindful of is, how is your brand actually engaging with fans today, right? Because you can't necessarily do it in person as you used to at shows. So what other things are you doing to make sure that people are still engaged with you? And so um, with the bands that you've worked with so far, it seems that a lot of them have that mindset. But for those that maybe have taken a little bit more of a backseat on this, like what would you say to them to make sure that there is more of that hype?
The way I look at it is just, the way I look at the industry is if you're not pimping out or pushing your brand, people forget about you and move on to the next. That's how it is. The
Mm,
market's so saturated, there's always another band to replace you. There's, the way I look at it is business mindset, right? So
mhm,
if you're not pushing your product, there'll be another band to make that sale of their CD instead of your CD or go to your live show. So you got to keep active. The bands that kept active during this pandemic, I think were the smart ones
mm,
because they still put out music. Because what I noticed also was a huge increase at the beginning of the pandemic. I saw so I use their social media software, right? There's media software for album deliveries and stuff like that's used behind the scenes, and the increase was just insane on the downloads because not every media outlet rep is full time, right? They're part time, so they all were at home more, and they were just downloading and covering everything with more time on their hands. So,
mm,
um, the bands that I did put out, they got a lot of coverage, and I was great. It was just a great increase. So, and I think I had some bands who are just like, we're not doing anything.
mhm,
They were supposed to drop albums and and they didn't even engage in their social media. And you know what? They're just forgotten and they're back to square one when they come back.
mhm,
It's back to building the hype. Whereas I look at it as a band who's been active through the whole pandemic, just putting out little things here and there and just letting people know that they're alive and they figured it out. Because, some bands figured a way to still record albums during the pandemic, remotely and stuff.
yeah,
So they kept active and they got their press and they got a fan base and nobody's forgotten about them. So it's hard, but you should still be active. Uh, um, the way I look at it is a band is a product, right? And it's a continuous product that you progressively build and build and build. The bands that have been successful are the ones who never stopped, who never took a break, who never went on hiatus. They just kept going and pushing because you got to keep on knocking on doors and keep, creating new interest and while maintaining old interest. And it's a hustle. That's how the music industry is. It's a hustle, and you snooze, you lose because there's always another band to replace you.
mhm.
Always. That's how this industry works, in my opinion. You know,
Yeah, for sure. And this points to another thing that I have discussed with a few bands that I've had the opportunity to interview, and that was reframing what this time of the pandemic was to them, and more specifically, how it was an opportunity to really grow their fan base and to reach out to new fans, or, if they're quite indie, they themselves reaching out to reviewers, to blogs, maybe doing some podcasts, and just finding different ways to get their name out there. And so, for those bands that are maybe a little bit more indie, how important is it for them to reach out to different people like that?
it's extremely important to just they should reach out to the you should still reach out to the industry. I had one band I was working with that was still reaching out to booking agents for touring when it comes back,
Mm,
right? Because it was inevitable. It's inevitable. It's going to come back. While still putting out a release. And they were still active they're very active on their social media, pumping out, and then just they did everything right. They realized we could still do everything. The only missing part of the puzzle was there's just no live shows, so might as well just put the puzzle together and let people be aware. I guess the best terminology I would use is brand awareness. They still created brand awareness, right, for the band. And so when things go back, it's not like we're starting at the bottom. Like people are aware. Oh, they put out an album this year, and then guess what? They're touring now, and you know what? I'm educated. I'm informed that they had an awesome album that I heard this year, and you know what? Now they're coming through for tour. I'm gonna go watch them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So whereas a band who's still waiting to put out stuff is kind of late to the game, in my opinion. That's how I look at it, because they just let almost 2 years of silence, right?
Mm-hmm.
A band that goes 2 years quiet is just not doing anything, no singles, no nothing. People forgot about you, and then you got to kind of reintroduce yourself again to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the next thing that I wanted to get into with you, John, is, for both the bands that, as you just said, unfortunately took that route and went silent, but also for the ones that have been active and are just looking to perfect or just, make their PR strategy a little bit better. So I kind of want to get into some nuts and bolts, some, basics of PR, and really get your thoughts on some of these questions that people might have, and just general observations from all the work that you've done so far. And so the first thing I wanted to ask you is a funny one, because I've seen this, and I'm sure you have seen this over the years too many times. But why is it that so many bands hate doing marketing and PR?
Because they're musicians. It's sometimes it's like that. I deal with this daily. I even have bands who are complaining about doing interviews. Yet you want exposure. Like they don't want to do radio interviews, or they don't want to do written interviews. They just want. Well, sometimes I get bands who are just like they want album reviews. They just want to hear feedback, right? But that's not how it works. It's full circle. Um, you know, it's puzzling. This industry has always been puzzling because I've come across characters who can do it all. They know how to do the marketing, and they get it. They get the business side, and they just get it, right? And if you just look at the successful bands that you're in love, that you love. They are the bands that get the industry, right? That's why they're successful. That's why they're playing arenas, or 5,000, 3,000 person venues every night, because they get the industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's always puzzled me why, you've invested so much time in just create. You have to, the artist has to write it, and then write it, record it, and then bring it to the marketplace, right? Packaging and product placements and all that stuff, right? That's how my brain works.
Mm-hmm.
Yet they think if they post it all to Facebook with 200 likes, it's a success, but it's not, because 10% only really pay attention, right?
Right.
So, it's I don't know. It's always puzzled me how you can write intricate pieces of music, but then when time comes to go to marketplace and we want to get down to the nitty gritty, you want to try to sell this and create brand awareness and get exposure. You get sometimes musicians who are just, they think it's too much effort. It's just too much work, but it's really not. It's a full package deal. It's part of the package deal. You gotta write, record, and then bring the product to market, right? And let people know about it. Why spend all that time? Spend 2-3 years writing and recording to drop it. And I've seen bands do that, and then they drop it. They drop the whole album. There's no plan. They just drop it with a Facebook post. Here's our whole album. And I had that actually today. A band decided to independently just try to push it themselves, and they admitted that it went under the radar. Nobody showed any interest. They thought that there was going to be interest on their socials, and that was it. And they would blow up, you know. But unfortunately, there's thousands and thousands of bands out there, and we're bombarded. Just society is bombarded with so much marketing. Everywhere you go, something's in your face. So the message has to be repeated over and over, until it's retained. That's another thing, right? As part of it. So my advice is bands. I think bands and as people should just educate themselves more. That's always been a huge problem. I talk my lingo sometimes with the bands and they're lost, so I have to educate them what this means and what this even when I say brand awareness, some bands are like, what does that mean? It's taking your brand, which is the band, and we're trying to create awareness. And with marketing, it's partially too with the band. It's maybe a little bit off topic, but image, we're a visual society first, and then audio. That's how I look at it sometimes. So your promo pictures, your album cover have to look engaging too, right? And then the music, the quality has to be perfect too. It has to be good quality. And then the explanation, the details of the story pitch too. There's so many elements that need to go in to convince a media outlet. And sometimes also that's a flaw by independent artists. They think I've seen this so many times. It's, hey man, this is my band. This is my Facebook. We just put out an album. Done. What am I supposed to do with that? That too. So I back to it. I think bands should educate themselves and do research. The first thing I learned when I was studying, I originally studied corporate PR. One of the first things they taught us was research. Research. Know your stuff before you go out there, before you send it out to market and the PR and all that. Because if you don't have the knowledge of what you're doing, it's just going to flop too, right? So, yeah, man, that's a loaded question because I could go on and on. There's so many various angles to go about it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're definitely going to circle back to some of these points. But one of the things that I was wondering was, yes, when you first present, some kind of PR plan or some strategy to an artist, I'm sure that if they don't have that business background, or as you said, they didn't educate themselves on what that process would look like, it definitely becomes overwhelming. But the other thing that might be happening is that they have preconceived notions on like, why would I send a thing to a print station? Isn't everything on social media now? So I'm curious to know, like, are there any common misconceptions that people come to you with around print, radio, TV, where you can just debunk right now for them?
Yeah, it's the demographics, in my opinion. The younger kids, the millennials are more digital age, but this is the way I look at it. You can't ignore all your demographics. There's so many different demographics. So print is still a medium, and you still want that print. You still want that print coverage because it also, in my opinion, print magazines are still the ultimate opinion. They have the best writers, in my opinion, majority of them, and their opinion matters. But it's just one channel. There's various channels you can target your market, right? So the way I look at it is that you want to cover all your bases. You can't pick and choose. I personally believe as a PR, you should try to be seen and heard in as many avenues as possible, right? It's the key of repetition of the message and retaining it, right? So we want the print. We want you to be seen in print. We want you to be seen on online websites. We want you to be heard on radio. We want you to be seen on social media. And then the more and more you see it, right? It's simple rules of marketing 101. The more and more you see it, you're trying to convince the public to buy into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal. So ignoring one, you can. Bands do that. I've but you're just neglecting an opportunity. That's how I look at it. It's everything leads to an opportunity somewhere down the road. But the thing with social media, it's more direct, right? It's just cut to the chase, right in your face, right? And I'll agree these days that a majority of people are on their phones. It's really like everybody's on their Facebook, their Instagram, their Twitter, their TikTok. It goes on, but it's just one avenue. The metal demographic goes from like 16 to like 55, 65 now,
Mm-hmm.
and you gotta kind of custom yourself still to each demographic. The older guys are still like physical. They like their print mags and their CDs. You know, whereas the younger kids, unfortunately, don't even know what the nostalgia is of owning a CD or a vinyl sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
which is unfortunate. It's all quick. The younger the band is, all they care about is Spotify.
Right.
Spotify. Get me on every Spotify playlist, and I don't. That's one that's one channel, right? That's one tool. You should concentrate on all the others. If you notice, like it's like I'm repeating myself. You go and see what the labels, the proper big labels, do, and the big bands. They're everywhere, right? It's also they have a bigger marketing budget too that they can do that, but you should be trying to be seen and heard everywhere and anywhere in a sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Definitely. Yeah. And there's definitely a lot of, issues that you brought up there, right? And ideas that, bands might think, but not necessarily understand the full context, or they go and try and do something based off of just quick transactions, which again is definitely more of a product of social media. But I'm curious to know, like, over the years, what are like the top three most common mistakes that people make in PR?
one is they rush. Okay, bands, especially independent bands, they just rush. I get this daily. They hit me up and they're like, "We finished our album. We want to release it next week." You
Mm,
know, there's no plan, there's no nothing, and I'm always replying. I'm like, "Well, you can do that, but I won't be on board." Because
right.
I like to do a plan. I honestly I'm at a stage where you come to me, and you know what? Let's say we're starting in May now. I'm telling bands, you want me to work on stuff. I like to have a timeline, a plan in place. So a good 2, 3 months out. So like July, August right now, we're planning for September. I have September already releases I'm planning.
Hmm.
It's the key is to come in with a plan, a timeline plan. So to break that down is know what singles you're gonna have. Or you're gonna have video content, lyric videos, music videos, playthrough videos, things that you can engage people online with too, right? Okay. Then a good bio. We need a good story pitch. You can't just say this is my album. Listen to it.
Yeah.
My band is genre thrash. That's it. Like there's a story behind every band, and I think you should tell that story. Not every writer and radio guy is gonna read it. It's catering to everybody. So some people just listen to the music and don't care for the backstory. Some people listen to the music and do care for the backstory, especially for interviews and album reviews. Understanding what this song's about and why'd you write it this way, and the way you wrote it with your riffing or your drumming and stuff like that, right? Your vocal technique, etc., etc. So I'm a firm believer in details. You gotta give details. um, so like first step is just plan. Just always plan, never rush. I don't understand why bands feel they have to rush it to the next week. It's like you spend so much time writing and recording, it what's another few months, right? And doing a proper release. It doesn't hurt you. It really doesn't. Um, because I see this daily. They drop the music video on their YouTube, and then they wonder like when nobody's watching it. The second thing, this is for more independent bands, is you've got to understand you're not a band that's being sought after. Nobody is looking for you. And kind of like the job of the PR and the marketing is to convince people to start looking for you. So you got to take that into consideration when you're making your plan. How can people start paying attention to us? We got to figure out ways, and that's the goal of marketing and PR, is figuring out ways that people invest their time into your product. That is the goal. That is what we're trying to do. And when you're an indie band, you're at the bottom and you got to progressively build it. There's no overnight solution in the music industry. It's years and years of pushing and pushing and pushing. Look at 𝑔𝐿𝐼𝐴. They're so successful right now, but you speak to that band, I bet you'll hear stories of so many hurdles they had to go through, right, to get where they are. All the big bands. So that's in a nutshell. It's just it's planning. Just plan it out, and then that's your marketing. And then when you're touring and stuff, that too. Live stuff too. Because another piece of advice I personally believe in, as a band needs to understand that they're a live entity first and foremost. If you can't sell yourself live, because I think the greatest PR is touring and playing in front of faces, right? Convincing the public that way. So that too should be part of your marketing plan, is have your tour plans in gear. I know as independent it's harder, but you got to do it. It's every band's done it. They paid their dues and hit the road, and they build their fan base, right? So that's another thing, and I think bands during COVID have no excuse. Really, they should have been planning a lot. There was so much time to plan stuff. There's hurdles in the way, yes, but there's plans. I have so many bands who come to me and they had their plans already. I love those kind of bands. They had all their videos ready. They knew what singles they wanted to release. They had their dates in mind, and we kind of worked it together. So it's being organized and presenting yourself as a product. That's how you got to do it. You're a product, and how are we going to do a product launch? I think I'm gonna like repeat myself and go back a bit, but I think every band should do a business 101 course.
Mm. Yeah, no, those are great points. I really resonate, especially with the second one that you mentioned there around how, when you are a new band, what you're really doing is showing off this new product, and you're competing in the marketplace now for attention. And then obviously, if the product is good, then over time, yes, you have a chance, like a better chance, but that doesn't mean anything, right? It's not guaranteed off the gate. So I'm happy that you brought that up. When it comes to the global marketplace, because that's really what we're talking about here, right? Like, even though our brand here at Great White North Metal is centered around Canada, we are a global community of metalheads, right? And so with such competition around, what do you think bands should be doing in order to stand out? So you mentioned already around having a plan. I think that's really important. Having a good strategy around their content. Is there anything else you would throw in there?
It's hard. It's like you got to stand out from the herd, right? It's such a saturated market. And one is, you got to sound unique musically, right?
Mm.
Unfortunately, not every band can stand out musically, right? But you try your best. I've seen some bands that get signed, and then you wonder, they sound so generic to a lot of stuff, right? But you got to just stand out, be unique on your musicianship and your recording. Have some kind of different angle. Some bands do concept records, which are cool. Your image too. That's key. I still, like I said before, I'm a firm believer we're visual societies. I think people do judge the book by the cover. They look at it and they're like, is this really for me?
Mm.
When you see Alice Cooper,
Right.
he's selling an image. When you see like Mastodon, they got an image. Metallica has got an image. Twisted Sister had an image. We can go on and on. Judas Priest had an image. Slayer, all of them kind of had an image to themselves, right? A little twist. Not only did the music kick ass, but they also had some kind of like image to them, right? Little marketing ploy that made it different, stand out from the pack, right? Like one band I really enjoyed this year doing was Phantom High.
Okay.
They called themselves a glamcore. So even that, changing the genre name, they just said we're glamcore, and their music video was high end, very well produced, and they obviously worked on their image. Their image worked so well with their music, um, and you could tell. So, and I got a lot of feedback from media who were like, "Wow, these guys are awesome! Like they fit." It's like you got to check off the list. I know some bands don't give a fuck, right? They just don't care. Oh, I'm just gonna play my music. But for the ones who are like, you want to really go further and go far with your music, it's like you gotta check it off, man. It's a bucket list of things, right?
Yeah.
But the first, I guess my best tidbit of advice is the first thing I ever learned working at a label was like quality of music. If the quality of music is not good, everything around it falls apart. You know, it's like I look at it as like a pie chart sometimes. It's like you got you got your music, and then actually a pie chart's not even the right terminology there. Um, but anyways, it's more like you got your quality of music, and it's like the gears around it, right? So the PR, the booking agent, the marketing, the label, your publishing, everything, etc., etc. Um, they all revolve around the quality of music. And if the quality of music is not good, everything else around it won't go as far either. So that's the key thing too. And then you know what? One thing I didn't mention that I probably should is relationship building,
Mm-hmm.
business relationships. I think that's another key part. Let's take aside the music and everything else. Business relationships. Bands get far. It's like any other business. Is building relationships with your public, your customers, your clientele, your business partners, etc. So I see this common where the bands forget about maintaining relationships with industry. So your concert promoters is key, because you want your live shows. So maintaining relationships with that. It's maintaining relationships with other bands, other musicians, and other bands because you're all gonna work together. You know, it's maintaining relationships with booking agents. It's just figuring out who are the players too. And not necessarily. I think a lot of bands get discouraged when they get shot down the first time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my word of advice is so they said no the first time. Doesn't mean, you can't go back. You should expect to be shot down. That is the industry telling you you're not ready yet. So keep working at it. And then when you're ready, they'll say yes. Like I see so many bands get discouraged or get pissed and then they burn bridges, right? But I sometimes feel that if the industry dudes are saying no to you right now, then they're probably right. They're at the stage of their careers where they're very good at what they do, and if they don't feel it's good to get out there yet to the public and stuff, then you should take their advice and ask for their advice. Where can I improve? Right? That's for the indie bands and stuff. So, but maintain the relationships on all circles and network. Networking is key. Knowing the players and knowing who's who. You got to know, and not necessarily being aggressive. That too. Sometimes band dudes are just so aggressive. Check out my band. Check out my band. Check out my band. And sometimes industry dudes don't want to be bombarded constantly, just talk to us like people, like, you know, and then when the right time to talk business is the right time, right? So let things cool off and just build the relationships. Sometimes, bands are successful because of their friendships too, right?
Hmm.
If we're all business partners, but we're also friends. So it's balancing that too. Everyone's just got to hang out and chill, and when the time right's to partner up and do something together, then that's time. So that's my other word of advice. And I've seen the successful bands that I've worked with that are touring and like internationally and stuff, that are indie. It's because they've also built very positive and good relationships with people. And that's another thing. Industry only want to work with people who are professional and courteous and polite, and humble, and you can't be a dick in this industry because you just burn bridges and word gets around. The industry's so small too. So
Hmm. Yeah, those are amazing points. And again, like I think that right now, yes, you can't necessarily do that networking in person, but again, with the idea and understanding that we are a global community, there's no reason why, indie bands that, let's say, are not signed to a label or they're not working with, a PR agency can go and start building those relationships. Like it could be as simple as following that particular writer, let's say, or that label,
yeah,
commenting on their stuff, liking their stuff, sending them information, maybe not directly asking up front, but building it up. And then
yeah,
from there, once you have something really concrete to show, it comes across more professional. It sounds like, now that there's more of a reason to check out your stuff, right? Um, and so one of the other angles I wanted to tackle PR with is how really good PR can actually lead to raising funds. So a couple bands I spoke to pre-pandemic were talking about, getting some grant funding for maybe, getting some new merch, recording an album, or even just funding their tour. And so I wonder if you could speak on that too, right? Like how important is it not only just to get exposure with PR, but some of the other elements of like fundraising for the business.
I think that's the beauty about Canada, is the grant system. It works. I sometimes hear some bands get so frustrated with the grant system, and I'm like, honestly, it's competitive. It's a very competitive. There's only so many grants to go around, right? But never get discouraged. Just keep going. Some bands it takes 7 to 10 times before getting a yes for the grants. You're not going to get it on the first shot sometimes. So, but use everything to your advantage, and especially in Canada, you got grant systems municipality wise. You got them provincially, and you got them federally.
Hmm.
So there's three tiers right there and then there's some charity ones too, right? That give out money, you know so it's like I said before, it's research. Do your research, or if you want to cut corners and have money, go find a grant writer. There's professional grant writers out there. Bands pay, if you don't know this world. um, and their job is to go get you grants. Apply, because grants are complicated. You got to present a good marketing plan. It's planning, planning, planning. What are you going to do with our money? You can't just say, I'm going to drop my album and I'm going to tour, in 2 sentences. They're definitely going to say no. You have to have a detailed plan to explain how you're going to take your product, your music, and your band and invest their money into furthering your career, right? So that's one way to go about it. And then the GoFundMe kind of thing, crowd stuff, right?
Hmm.
That's the way I look at it. It's actually a good thing in a sense, because you're kind of securing your pre-orders and your financial security in a sense, right? Because you're pushing, and you know what sales you're making, right? Before you actually got your product completed, but you have to finish. I've seen some bands unfortunately do a GoFundMe and not complete a project, and you just
Mm.
burned your bridges. It's kind of like you stole money. So you got to be careful with that. But you're getting a guaranteed investment, right, to help you out to create. It's just people paid you in advance already for an unfinished product that they're going to wait for. So I like that system because it's guaranteed sales. You got your sale already. All right, we got sales. So and then with PR, if you throw it in the mix, PR helps in a sense. It's like a catch-22. PR helps get the grants. I've worked with some festivals and some bands for their grants, and honestly, the grants look at what if the band. You can't just go completely unexperienced. They got to see that you're experienced too. So if you can present that you have print publications such as newspapers, dailies, weeklies, and magazine monthlies writing about you, and then you do a Google search and you're on a bunch of websites and stuff, and then your social media numbers are a good number, um, you know, and you tell them also, like, sometimes this is in the grant system. If you have a publicist and a label, but more or less a publicist, I get that asked daily if I could be put on grants. Then it's considered because they know, okay, the money's being invested to get the word out too, right? So it's a catch-22. So, like, example, like I had one festival I worked for that we began with no money. It was all personal investment, and then we did the PR, and now we get government grants, right, to help
Mm-hmm.
out. So that helps. Same thing with some of the touring bands. They did it all on their own, and then they had PR. We had a press kit. We had all these snippets. And we could present like we're a serious band. People are writing about us. People are talking about us. We're worth investing in. You know, you
Definitely.
that's how the grant system is. Are you worth investing in? And it's the same thing with a label. A label's going to look at you. Are you worth investing money into? It's simple business, right? You know, it's like an investor going to a startup company. What's your startup doing? Am I going to drop $1 million into this startup company? Like, show me what's worth it. So what I find sometimes is some bands just don't they want to just skip all that, right? They don't want to put in the long effort that has to go with that, but it's got to be done. That's how I look at it. It's got to be done.
Yeah. So again, right, we're circling back to the importance of PR as a long-term strategy, something where it's not only based off of getting in front of larger publications, larger fan bases, but building your brand over time, and how that helps not only, the band grow, but also gain funding, gain almost like accolades, right? I'm thinking about this as, when you're putting something on your resume, right? And someone asks, "What have you accomplished?" Right? These are all
Exactly.
things that you can put down, and they're all things that you can incrementally build up to, right? It's not something where you have to
Yeah,
tackle.
it's funny you say that because I use the resume analogy often.
Nice.
It's like going to a job interview, right? What's on your resume? Zero. We've never played live. We've never released anything yet. So what makes you think a label's going to sign you right now? What makes you think a booking agent's going to sign you right now? You know, I take on those kind of projects because that's the job of the PR is to take something fresh and new and try to build it, right? Build some meat to it, right? Build your resume. I'm helping you build your resume a bit.
Hmm.
That's I think that's the best analogy I like to use. What's on your resume?
Yeah, for sure. And for everybody that's listening, we've covered quite a lot of ground so far. And if everything is sounding quite overwhelming, one of the things that I want to urge you all to do is to check out John's organization, so Asher Media Relations. And what they're going to be doing is really figuring out some strategies that are more tailored to your band, your goals, and yeah, figure out what kind of strategy can be put into place using some of the different things that we talked about today, but I'm sure, as you said, John, like there's like a lot of other pieces to this, right? And
Oh
so,
yeah,
um,
it's a puzzle, right?
exactly, yeah. So what's the best way that people can get in contact with you?
Honestly, I'm an email guy.
Okay.
So just @Gmail. Um, I like I'm old school, I guess, but I like all my messages in one place, and that's my inbox. Um, so, but you can try through Facebook. I'll tell you the same thing. I'll still tell you to go to just email me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Asher Media at Gmail. But if you want to hit me also on the social media, it's Facebook. It's Asher Media Relations. That's the page. And then Instagram is at Asher Media. Twitter's at Asher Media. And yeah, those are the four that you could hit me up on.
Awesome. Okay. So I'll make sure to include all of the links in the show notes as well as your email address. And the last couple of things I wanted to touch on are a little bit outside of PR, but just kind of general industry trends and what your thoughts are on that. And so, from what I can see, there's a lot of focus in terms of what's going to happen in 2022. We've seen, a lot of larger festivals being announced in the world. There are, new apps popping up all the time, and recently there's been a focus on NFTs. And so I'm curious, from your experience, John, and the things that you've been hearing, what are your predictions of some of the larger trends in the music space moving into 2022?
Oh man, I don't even know, man. Uh, Honestly, I think 2022 is going to be the year of just everyone concentrating on touring,
Mm,
building back the live scene. I think that's going to be the main trend because a lot of people lost their jobs, right, in the industry or on hiatus. So I think uh, a lot of bands and labels and industry dudes is just we're going to see an increase on touring. Touring is going to be the main focus. I think people getting out there playing live shows as much as possible. I think also a trend will be ticket prices will go up. I
mm,
think that's going to be a thing. Uh, People are going to try to recoup your costs. That's going to be unfortunate. I just got this feeling that's what's going to happen. Um, and then on the other side for PR and stuff, social media, you mentioned a bit, I don't even know what's going to happen. There's always something new, right? TikTok was the latest, right? In my
mm,
opinion, for the music industry. I've been reading a bit of this and of the NFT stuff. I haven't really personally dived deep into it. I've read like an article here and there, so I can't really comment on that.
mm,
But there's always something new and fresh for the music industry. Like the way I look at it is things come and they go, right? It's the simple business model of, a new product comes in and then it dies. Like MySpace came in, it's dead.
mm,
Twitter will eventually die. Facebook will eventually die. Spotify will eventually die. There's always going to be something new and fresh to replace these apps. But for the time being, this is what's being used, right?
mm.
Um, Honestly, yeah, I don't really have a comment. I don't know what's going to be the next thing to push the music industry. Um, yeah, I really don't know.
Well, definitely the one thing that we can say though is around shows and the return of that, and seeing how people in the local scenes will build that up again. Maybe not to the exact same level as it was before, as you mentioned, but really seeing that coming together once again. So I think that that's something to positively to look forward to.
Yeah, I think there'll be limited space for these shows too. It's not going to be
Hmm.
full circle, right?
For sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah. All right. And so for the final word of the podcast, I want to give you an opportunity to shout out maybe some bands that you're working with, other folks in the industry, um, just to kind of give people an idea of, maybe some other things to look
my board is so busy.
at.
Um, I'll comment. There was a lot of releases this year. Like I'm burnt out. I'm actually technically I should be burnt out, passed out, coma, because there's just been so much sleepless nights and lots of work. I guess I'll comment like check out like Immortal Guardian. They were a fun one to do this year, and their whole album was is based on the COVID pandemic. It's called Psychomatic, right?
Mm.
And they're one of the bands I will comment that had their stuff together. They did everything remotely. They have a drummer in Montreal. They have their guitarist in Las Vegas, their singer in Las Vegas, I believe, and then their bassist is in Texas. And they did the whole album remotely, and yet they still got their social media stuff together, and put videos together. They were still able to put lots of video content together, and on top of it, they're going to be touring. Like, they got their game together. They're going to be touring later. So that's one band I personally think people should check out is Immortal Guardian. And then there's some other ones I'm excited to do that will be touring too, is like Kill the Imposter from Florida. There's Deformatory. Those guys will be doing their new album. And then there's like Canthro, who's dropping a new album from Ottawa. I've been waiting on. Can't wait to release that one. There's so much. There's just I'm gonna get in trouble because I'm
not mentioning one.
Yeah, one band's gonna be like, "You didn't mention me, buddy."
Right.
Yeah.
That's
So
awesome. Well, I really appreciate all of the work that you've been doing over the years. And yeah, as I mentioned before we started recording, personally, I am subscribed to your newsletter, so I get some really cool insights into some bands in Canada and all over the world that you work with as well. And so, again, if anybody has found value in what we're talking about today, I recommend you reach out to John and see if working with him and his firm makes sense for PR. And this is just part one of a couple of videos that we're going to be making regarding the music business and just understanding how we can all support the metal scene beyond just buying an album, because although that's where a lot of it starts, there's more to this. So John, again, I want to thank you for joining us today, and yeah, we'll definitely chat again soon.
Hey, this is John Asher, and you're listening to GWN Metal Podcast.